Okay, Brighton 1, Bologna 0. In the final pre-season match in pre-season, we are now ready to go. Thursday night, Tromsø away. Then with Villa at home at the AMEX on Sunday before we host Tromsø at the AMEX the week after. We are right and ready to be in the cut and thrust of a Premier League and Europa Conference League season ahead of us. So how are we? Are we ready? What did yesterday show us against Bologna? How are we lining up? How are we looking, and what is there to learn? I think, to be honest, the top line from me is, look, an easy, kind of comfortable day at the office. It wasn't a glamorous game at all. In fact, it was a pretty boring game, particularly that first half. I don't think we can come away and say we've learned loads from this game. But, you can't doubt the fact that it's another clean sheet. It's a perfect record throughout pre-season in terms of wins, in terms of getting these results. Wycombe Wanderers, obviously playing Strasbourg as well, Roma, Bologna, the game against the Kuwait side as well. We've had a picture-perfect kind of run in pre-season. Some might argue it's felt a little bit too easy, but yesterday it was professional, it was controlled. We saw a lot of the new signings again, be those the youngsters, be those the kind of more experienced defenders. We saw the breadth and depth of our squad on show yesterday, with subs coming on kind of in the 65th minute, the 70th minute, in the 75th. We saw a lot of the squad, and I think we really do now know how Fabian Hurzeler is going to at least start the season in terms of this side. I think it's now very clear that Vuskovic-Baskagli, I would say it's quite clear that they're the starting two centre-halves. I'd say that the starting central midfielders, Gross and Ayari, I think there's probably no doubt about that at the moment as well. Hinshelwood is your number 10, there's no doubt about that. Rutter is your number 9, there's no doubt about that. I don't think we can doubt the fullbacks either. Wieffer and Kadioglu, I think they're the starting left and right back. I think where it gets more interesting is on the wing, and we'll come to this later, and I've spoken about it in other videos around that depth. Diego Gomez, right winger. We're definitely going to start the season with probably him as our right winger. We saw yesterday Maxim de Kuiper is the left winger. Is that our best option? Is that all we've got? Does it force us to play a bit of a different way? As we saw against Bologna, actually Brighton played a very sort of narrow style of football, Diego Gomez, Maxim de Kuiper, left and right wing. Really, actually, what we saw was they were playing quite narrow, tucking in quite a lot, and it was the responsibility of Kadioglu and Wieffer to bomb on and kind of really provide that width. Forgive me, I'm just looking at my notes here. But actually, yes, we can call those guys in de Kuiper and Gomez wide options. Really, actually, I think we saw yesterday against Bologna is they're actually more just kind of midfielders and forwards who tuck in, get involved, kind of mix around a bit, and we get that width from the fullback. Now, look, maybe that's a tactical move that Hurzeler's doing because he's lost those kind of out-and-out wingers in Mitoma, in minteh, and maybe he doesn't have that supreme confidence in players like Kozia Dubry, Osman, Johanna to kind of kick off the season and put that full faith in from the start, which is fair enough, and I would echo that point. But I thought it was okay yesterday. I thought we learnt not loads. I think one thing we did learn, I think actually, is that the defence looks pretty good. The defence does look ready to go. And we spoke about it before in terms of that depth that we've got. I think absolutely there is a point around depth there that we are essentially ready for the start of the season. Vuskovic-Baskagli starting centre-halves, the fullbacks are ready to go. Interesting that it seems now we are starting the first season in a very, very long time where Lewis Dunk, when available, won't be, one of the starting centre-halves, won't be part of a kind of centre-half combination that's starting the season. I think one thing worth remembering, though, is about that depth you need in the European competition. And we obviously saw that 2 seasons ago when we were playing in Europe. And I've said it before, when you get into the back end of the season, you really need that kind of depth. There'll absolutely still be a role for someone like Lewis Dunk. And I wonder almost even if, on Thursday night, it'll be interesting to see, right? Because obviously Vuskovic and Baskagli, in my mind, are those kind of two that Hurzeler clearly wants to start with. What then happens on kind of Thursday night in Tromsø? Does he go with his absolute starting 11, or is that the starting 11 that he's looking to go with more in the Villa game on Sunday? Will we see on Thursday night a bit of a kind of mixed up team? Will we see players like Johanna starting there? Will it be almost treated a bit like a kind of extension of pre-season before we start the season in earnest, against Villa on Sunday at the AMEX? Will we see, Cashin, Igor, Strauk alongside someone like Dunk? Will we see Michael Svoboda, who obviously came on in the 65th minute and performed really well, looked quick, looked confident, looked aggressive, actually, We saw a couple of times those recovery runs he made, against the kind of counter-attack, looked really, really physical, was, very, was very happy to kind of actually boss and lead the kind of back line. We saw him really kind of issuing commands to Lewis Dunk throughout the game, which is ironic considering Lewis Dunk's obviously the club captain, the kind of traditional leader of that back line. I think it shows that actually where we've maybe lost leadership elsewhere across the squad in terms of Van Hecker, in terms of Welbeck, in terms of Milner, in terms of Webster, Solly March, actually we have brought in these leaders, players like Svoboda, obviously a club captain before he joined the Albion. It'll be interesting to see, maybe would it be him and Dunk that start against Tromsø when we go away on Thursday, with the view that Vuskovic and Buscaglia as our starters will obviously come in on Sunday. I think it'll be really interesting to see that. One of the big headlines from this game yesterday obviously is the fact around Jack Hinshelwood, isn't it? He is now one of the most important players for Brighton. We've seen in the last few days those links, how reliable they are. I think, that remains to be seen around those kind of Arsenal links, and the fact Arteta's interested in him. Ultimately, that's no surprise. I think he's going to be one of those players who, this season, as he's playing in the 10, I think we're going to see a real burst through from him. He's scoring a lot of goals in pre-season. We've seen him score multiple goals so far, and he's going in with that real momentum. He's got a real grace and elegance in the way he kind of plays in that 10, the way he was linking up with Pascal Gross with those little flicks and tricks into each other and linking up with Rutter nicely, and the way he gets on the end of things. He's hunting things down. He's just got a real energy and a real confidence in the way he's playing, and almost kind of makes runs sometimes that, are reminiscent of a striker. And, I think for him is another game where he had a bit of a kind of, puffing out of his chest and a kind of talismanic vibe about him, where he was ready to kind of take the game by the scruff of the neck of himself. And obviously he's going to clearly be a key part for Brighton this season in terms of, how our attack shapes up. I think in an ideal world, you would have always thought of kind of Georginio Rutter maybe as the 10 and Jack Hinshelwood as an 8 or something, literally wearing the number 8, and you'd have a striker ahead of them. I think at least, for the start of the season, we're going to see Georginio Rutter start as that number 9, aren't we? And look, yesterday against Bologna, there's no doubt about it. He offered plenty. I think you can absolutely say he deserved huge credit for creating that goal over out on the left-hand side, the way he was able to hold onto the ball, dribble, get his head down with that pace and power, knock the ball out into a dangerous area for Wieffer to take the shot on. It was powerful. He carried the ball really well. But actually, I think for me, it's clear that he's not naturally that number 9. He doesn't naturally spend loads of time kind of drifting in and out in the penalty box. He's not got that kind of pure striker's instincts. Naturally, in an ideal world, he'd probably be playing off a number 9. But I think it is interesting. I think, the question mark is there. Do Brighton still need an attacker? In my mind, absolutely. I think in terms of a right winger, I think that's probably maybe our left wing. I think it's just the most fundamental position, or a striker, or someone who can do a bit of everything across the front line. I'm seeing people talking about a centre mid being a priority. I cannot fathom that. The idea that we're going into a season where we're playing 4 competitions, we're playing in Europe, and our senior wingers are literally nobody. They're a left back who has rarely kind of played left wing for us, and when he has never set the world alight, and a right winger and a centre mid playing at right wing who is played as a centre mid for his whole time at Brighton, and we're going into a 4 competition campaign with those as our wing options. Yes, we'll have Mitoma and minteh back. It just seems bizarre to me. And, the idea that we're going to trust players like Mario Kozia-Dupri, Osman, Zadok Johanna to be our outlets in terms of the wing, in terms of starting the season, it does concern me. With that said, though, I think Osman came on, played well. It looked really direct, gave some of that natural pace, as I've sort of written here. We saw it with Zadok Johanna. I think maybe looked a little bit more cautious than we saw him against Roma, but he definitely had the beating of his man. I think, a massively exciting talent. We had Kostulas come on, forced a really good save late on in the game. Looked definitely physically there, physically capable of kind of competing with those Bologna defenders, and was able to kind of really rough them up a little bit. And I think actually while we're waiting on players like Seamas and even Evan Ferguson and what our other options might be, it's clear that, Charalampos Kostulas will be, a pretty prominent option for us this season, I imagine. One thing I do want to say is I thought Malik Yakuya, when he came on, with, what was it, kind of 15, 20 minutes, or maybe it was 30, maybe it was longer to be fair, looked really good, had that kind of ticking tempo about him, popping it off, nice simple passing, kind of recovery runs, intercepting balls. He looks like a really tidy player, and a player who knows, might be one that we keep around the season. It's getting late, in the transfer window, so all the hallmarks are maybe in fact you know, the fact that we do need a little bit of depth in centre mid, maybe he'll be one of those people that we rely upon. I'd be more than happy to see him this season, particularly with the amount of games we're going to have. I think, look, going into the Tromsø game, it's going to be interesting. As I said at the top, you know, are we going to go in with that strongest 11? Are we going to see Vuskovic, Pascaglu? Are we going to see Rutter, Hinshelwood? Are we going to go all guns blazing in the first leg and try and get over the line? Or are we going to kind of treat it as an extension of pre-season and maybe save that pure starting 11 that we want to go with as our main starting 11 for Villa on Sunday? I'd probably lean towards the latter, believing that we've got enough depth at least to kind of get through Tromsø with that defensive and midfield kind of stability. You know, even if we're not massively free-flowing, I'd almost take that risk. But look, I think looking back on pre-season, I think we can come away and say, you know, Rutter in the number 9 looks decent. Hinshelwood, you know, has become that kind of leader in terms of carrying the team and getting goals. The defence absolutely looks ready. But Brighton still do lack that kind of natural depth, that natural verve that I think that we maybe got from players like Minteh and Mitoma, and would have felt much more comfortable if you had them leading the line with our other options. Gomez, De Kuyper, Zadok Johanna, Obusman, Mario Kozijibri supporting them, and that is my concern. We will see. We'll be back with the action throughout this week, so we're building up to Tromsø. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.